Hello, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. Today, we're going to be discussing Africans and their role in the Black Lives Matter movement. This is obviously because of the recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of the protests that have been going on all throughout the United States and even all throughout the world. And so we just want to give our perspective as Africans to see why exactly, how do we fit into this Black Lives Matter movement situation, and why Africans might not feel like they want to get involved. Some Africans, at least, might not want to get involved with the movement. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and our panelists will also introduce themselves. You can tell us your name, what country you're from, and then how long you've been in the States. My name is Bolu Aluko. I'm from Nigeria, and I've been in the US for about 15 years.
Hi, my name is Louisa. I am from Ghana. I was born in Ghana, and I've been in the States for about 15 to 16 years.
Hi, my name is Chizoba Naraka. I'm Nigerian. I've been in the States for give or take 11 years now.
Hey everyone, I'm Effie Taylor. I'm Ghanaian, and I returned back to the States in about 2008.
Hey everyone, I'm Rolly. I am Nigerian, and I've been in the state too for about 10, 11 years.
Hi everyone, I'm Lamle Lawson, and I'm actually first generation American and Ghanaian. So I've been in the States for 28 years.
Thank you, everyone. So as I said earlier, we are going to be discussing Africans and our roles in the Black Lives Matter movement, but I kind of want to reel it in a little bit. With everything going on in the world right now, I kind of want to just check in. So what emotions does the state of our country, well, the United States, and the solidarity that Black people have been receiving all throughout the world, what emotions do all of those events evoke in you?
Well, I can go ahead and start. I would say initially, because I've been here for, I think, I would say a substantial amount of time, I was frustrated. I was angry. I was sad. I was feeling the same emotions that every other Black person in America was probably feeling, and I just felt like, it was like, damn, again, we cannot win. And it really took a toll on my emotional state of being and just me being able to focus on anything else but my anger. So, yeah.
I think for me, from the very beginning was anger. And then, like right now, I'm suspicious of everybody, honestly, because like some people are just there saying, oh, we support you people, and then in the back, they're not. So like right now is more suspicious of people that are trying to sound right just so to be that, oh, they're in with the Black people, but they're not really with the Black people. But then I know like when this started, I was having issues sleeping for like a straight week when this started. So like imagine that with every other thing you have going on in your life. So like it's a lot in general.
I would say overwhelmed and frustrated at the same time. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. Everybody is at home, and we literally witnessed a murder on camera throughout. And preceding that, there were other things that had led up to that. I think this is not new. So it was also expected. We've seen this moment before, Ferguson, Trayvon Martin, it's happened, but this felt a bit different, honestly, being here, where there was a different type of momentum. So I think we reached another inflection point in history, and this was kind of the last straw. So it was kind of expected, and for someone who identifies as a disruptor of what is the norm for society, I was all with it. I was all for everything that was happening. I think it's expected and necessary.
Yeah, I think to your point, being a disruptor and kind of being with what was going on, all the disruption, all the protests, I was really excited because I remember talking to my partner, and I were talking when the whole Ahmaud Arbery situation went down. and we were pissed. Like, so I think just kind of coming off the heels of the Ahmaud Arbery situation, that's why we're here right now. And I am excited that we are protesting and we are continuing to protest. We're making demands. I'm still very much pissed off, but I am very excited that it's kind of like the domino effect is rippling globally. Like, people are protesting in Brazil, they're protesting in Norway, they're protesting in the UK. So I am loving what's going on, and I'm really hopeful. You know, I'm a pessimist, but I'm really hopeful that this actually leads to some sort of systemic change and Black people like not being seen as the bottom of the barrel like decade after decade. I'm over it.
Yeah, I agree. For me, what I felt was pain and anger. Like Lamley, no, not Lamley. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember everybody's name, but I think it's Effie. Yeah, like Effie said earlier. You know, we witnessed a murder, and it was different because with Trayvon Martin, with the other, what's his name? I'm trying to remember his name. Oh my God. I can't remember.
Eric?
But anyway, it was never recorded on camera. Even Aubrey was never recorded on camera. But to see that we actually get to see the process and to see their emotions, like literally showing no emotions towards another soul. I think for me, that was it. It was really disheartening because, you know, a lot of times we hear it, they say, oh, well, they weren't cooperating, or we didn't, you know, we don't get to see it, but it's what they tell us. But this time we got to see eye for eye what's happening. And this, I'm sure this is not the first time it's happened. So it really shook me to see that this is what they do, you know, behind the scene. And then, you know, then they come on media and portray it to us in a different way. That, I think that for me was it. Like, it was really shocking. It was heartbreaking.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was interesting because we've seen so many of these videos. I mean, we've lost count of the hashtags. We've seen Philando Castile, Eric Garner. I mean, all of these very, oh, was that the name? Okay.
Yeah. You're always trying to remember.
I mean, there have been so many though. It's not even, it's a testament to how many cases there have been. And I think there is something to be said about this perfect storm that set up, where people were in a position to be consuming a lot of media and not be just have the normal distractions. Honestly, I feel like none of this would have really taken hold if it hadn't have been for a worldwide pandemic. But my emotions were sort of interesting because, you know, I was in Ferguson. You know, I lived in St. Louis. I went to school there, and I lived there after I graduated. And it felt like something we had been yelling from the rafters from forever. You know, I was in college when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and it just felt like one of those situations where you've maybe been in a debate with someone and you've brought up points and they've shown that they're not listening, or they've shown that they're not considering your point of view, and then they come back like 2 days later and start to articulate the things that you've been yelling for a while. It's this weird mix of finally you're getting it, and at least we're happy that you're on the train now, but also this pain that comes with getting that confirmation that you were ignored, that confirmation that your cries, your pain was falling on deaf ears. So it's been an interesting set of emotions, because this isn't new. I mean, I feel like everyone in this chat, we've known this, we've seen this. We didn't need further confirmation. We didn't need to see more trauma to believe that this was an issue. But to see what it took to get people who you consider to be your neighbors, or maybe your friends or your coworkers, to see and to be galvanized, it's great that people are in the party now, but it's sort of hurtful at times when you think about how long. I mean, it's been years, and of course this has been the cry of the country since, I mean, decades, 400 years. So it's not like it's even something that's new with our generation. But I have to admit that amidst all the pain and the overwhelmingness of the issue, there was that hurt that felt more personal, that hurt that felt like the people that I spoke to one-on-one and that I shared with and that I tried to get to see my point of view didn't get here until now.
I think like the term that you were looking for was gaslighting, because that's what has been going on. Like, you tell people this is what is happening to me and they just gaslight you. And like, you start asking yourself, am I actually experiencing this, or is it just in my mind? So I think for a lot of Black people, that's what we've been experiencing for like centuries on end. And then for everybody to like be at home at this, I say divine intervention, that's what I'm going to call it. It's honestly divine intervention that everybody, who would have thought that we'll all be at home struggling through a pandemic, and then everybody will get to see this, and then all the other dominoes that have just dropped in the span of like 2 or 3 months. Nobody would have guessed that. So it's honestly divine intervention, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna try to pivot the conversation towards us, you know, as Africans. I want to ask everyone, why do you think Black or African immigrants receive privileges that African Americans don't receive?
Well, I'll start here. I think that my cousin and I were having this conversation the other day, and I want to do a definition and then a breakdown of why we have these privileges and why it may be why other people might not see certain things a certain way. So I saw this wonderful cartoon, and it really highlights systemic racism in the most basic way possible, and we'll link it up with the video. But basically, it was, you have systemic racism that stemmed from slavery to Jim Crow to what we're currently facing right now. And during the Jim Crow era, when they thought like, you know, slavery was over, but there was still racism in the country, we had things like redlining, we had the housing segregation, you had housing segregation that led to defunding of certain public schools. So you had the white public schools that had all the nice funding and didn't have had all the good resources, and you had the Black public schools which didn't have all the funding and they lacked the resources. And so you have a bad school, you don't have resources, you're not allowed to go into an educational system that would uplift you into certain spaces, and then the spiral begins, right? Insert the Immigration Act of 1965. Mm-hmm. Now, we Africans get a chance to enter into this community. Now, the thing about immigrating into a system is that anytime somebody comes from anywhere and enters into a system that's already established, they want to attach themselves to the dominant and majority population. So you have Africans who come in here, either the poor Africans who have sold everything and, you know, this America is the land of milk and honey, I want to live out my American dream. Or you have Africans who have privilege, who already have wealth in their respective countries, coming into the system, and they meet in that halfway level where you can go to the bad public schools and maybe still make it out, or you can go into the neighborhood that already has all of the good funding and enter a system that comes with white privilege. You enter the system that puts you in proximity to good paying jobs, puts you in proximity to networking, puts you in proximity to benefits, right? And now you're living the American dream. What happens to the Black people who didn't get those opportunities because the system had already tore them down? They don't have that privilege. So Africans entered the system in a way that allows them to line up with the majority, and with that we're already a step ahead, and it's unfortunate.
And I think there are also prejudices to that too, because research does show that white people do prefer Black names that sound more African. Like, they will hire, you know, Black names that sound more African than, you know, like a stereotypical African American name. And just to speak to, like, to add to some of the stuff that Louisa just said, it's important for us to note that Black people are 13% of the United States population. Only about 20, I would say about 20% of that of those people have a college degree that are educated in a sense. And we all know what college degrees come with. It comes with, like, you know, having better pay, having, you know, more opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So 20% of those Black people have a college degree. There are only about, only 10% of them are Black. 10% of all the Black people here are Black immigrants. And they make up about 50% of, like, they within, like, their subset, about 50% of them are educated. So I think the numbers are something like, there are 8 million Black immigrants in the country. Yeah, actually, there are 8 million educated people in the country. 4 million of them are Black immigrants. 2.7 million are educated Black immigrants. So that's like 50%. So when you take out all of the Black immigrants and you just look at the raw African Americans, only about 6 million of those people are educated. That is 15% of raw African Americans that are educated, in, like, versus the 33% white people that are educated in this country. And it's due to all of the stuff Louisa said. It's due to the decades of slavery, the decades of Jim Crow, centuries of slavery, decades of Jim Crow, decades of redlining, and now mass incarceration. That's why when we swoop in and we haven't been affected by all of that gunk, that's why we're able to profit. That's why we have a privilege in this system. And I need more Africans to really understand that and stop, saying it's because they're lazy.
Okay, so you guys are right, and I like all the stats that are coming with everything, but, like, I was looking up, like, an article. So there's a student, I forget, I have to scroll now, but she wrote a dissertation on, like, the relationship between Africans and African Americans in this country. So, like, one of the excerpts that she had in her paper said, the Black people have indeed been brainwashed and encultured to think that Blacks are genetically of lower cognitive ability than whites, as was particularly observed in studies performed in 1950s and 1960s. So the reason, like, why I bring this up is that for Africans coming in ourselves, in our country, we have this idea of what America is, or again, the description, the line that Louisa used, land of milk and honey. That's literally how people think about it. People just think, oh, you land in America and you pick money off the floor. Some people literally think like that. So, like, for us, for centuries on end, us in Africa, we've been taught, oh, America is great, white people are fantastic. Even in our countries, you see the problems that we have in itself. And then you leave there and you come to America with all the notions that you've been taught. Just like African Americans in America have been taught or conditioned to the life that they have right now in the situations that they're in. Africans in general, we've been conditioned to see America as a land of milk and honey, where white is great, Black people are not. Mm-hmm. There's literally a term that Africans use to describe African Americans, if we're really talking about it. There's a term for it. So you come into the United States and again, white people tokenize you because you're African and not African American. The African American is viewed as less than an African. An African, again, we're the yes sir people. We're quick to agree with, a lot of people are quick to agree, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it. And you just go ahead and you do things just because you're told to do it. And because white people in your eyes are supreme. So you do things because, hey, that's what I'm supposed to do. Without questioning, you find that a lot of African Americans are quick to question certain decisions that people make. And white people in general don't like that. Mm-hmm. So when they get a lot of that, they tend to have like a pushback. And then it creates that atmosphere where they're like, oh, we don't really like African Americans, but we like Africans. Yeah. They're the men people. So they're going to do what we want. And hence, you see like a good promotion of, not to say that a lot of Africans don't work for what they have. They do. You put in your work for what you have because you know where you're coming from. You know what I mean? So like it's either your first generation or you're straight up coming from Africa in the first place. So you know where you're coming from, or you know where your parents came from. So you're gonna put in the work for a better life for yourself, you know? But like white people tokenize Africans and we're quick to suck on that. Oh, we suck on it. Literally, it's just like a baby nestling on the mom's breast. We suck on it and we live off of that because, hey, these people are praising me so much. So I need to be enjoying this. And then you look at all the other African Americans not understanding that, oh, this is what white people are doing to me, while this is what they're doing to the African Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I really like the statement you made when you said, as African Americans, African Americans are quick to question things, and and Africans don't question things, and it's more like a yes sir, yes ma'am kind of situation. And a few days ago, I was talking about this on my Instagram story, and I was just talking about the disparity because I feel like there's still a huge gap between Africans versus African American, and it's still gonna take a lot of time and a lot of effort to bridge that gap and for us to actually connect. I mean, it's gotten better from where it used to be. If we really want to go there, it's gotten a lot better, but I feel like there's still, a huge disconnect. And a lot of it is sometimes because for African Americans, it's sometimes because they don't know, and for us, it's more so we feel like we know it all, or especially with the older generations, like I feel like I know it all. So one of the things I was talking about in my Insta story was questioning things, and as far as we being Africans, especially with our, let's say like our parents and uncles, most people who still have a lot back home, like have a lot of attachment back home.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my examples was this. Okay, say for example, I work at a nursing home. I am Bolu, work at a nursing home. Bolu is African American. I'm African, right? And they call me on my day off, and I tell you, as an African, I know I need that money. I know I'm building this land in Nigeria, so I'm like, you know what? Sign me up. I'm coming, right? But then they call Bolu. Bolu says, no, this is my day off. I'm not going to go. I'm not coming in. I don't feel like coming in. It's not convenient for me. So with that being said, that's a privilege for me. That's a privilege that I've given myself because, one, I'm doing something for myself, right? But two, at the end of the day, I'm seen as the hard worker, the one that they can rely on, the one that's accountable. And that's what it is when you talk about, when we look at the way it is with, working white people working with Africans versus African Americans, because a lot of Africans do not speak up, especially like once again with our older generation. Like it's more so yes sir, yes ma'am, that's what my boss says, so that's what I'm gonna do. I find myself a lot of times talking to people like, why are they asking you to do this? Did you ask this? Did you email this? Can you speak up? You don't tend to speak up, but just say yes sir, yes ma'am. If they tell you no, it's no. You don't fight for what you deserve. You don't fight for what you want. You go to I was in grad school. My friend actually was trying to get funding, and the man told her no. I said, well, email the dean. They got to give you funding one way or another. And she said, I can't email him. It's not going to answer. What do you mean it's not going to answer? He's supposed to answer your email. So just those little things and those little fear of, oh, I'm coming from another place, so I should respect myself, or I don't feel like I can really say how I want to, say things because I'm scared of being labeled as this, that. I think that's something that, that we need to think about too when we talk about questioning things.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Lamle.
No, go ahead.
The conversation is kind of scattered and evolved, and trying to figure out where to start from. I know you talked about privilege, and you guys have all highlighted and touched on a lot of things. The model Black is what I call it. We are the model Black person according to the system, and whether we see it or not, Africans play right into the hand of the systemic oppression. And I think when we use the term privilege, people get very defensive. They think, I'm not privileged, I've worked for it, because you're taught growing up, when you work hard, you're gonna get the end result. And that is absolutely not true, and we see it here. The funny thing, I think it's also not true back home, because if you look at home, I think even when I think of Black is not a monolith, right? So you have a Black person who has lived here, grown up here, but this first gen, they've grown up here, they went to middle school, high school, whatever it was, versus someone who comes and has lived maybe in Africa and comes here for college. Very different perspectives. And if I'm coming from Ghana, I'm not looking at race. Racism is not the direct thing I have experienced. Like, everybody around me was Black, so it's not a direct, effect of that. But there is a subset of racism that I've experienced, colorism, or where you feel, or classism, which is a very big issue back home. But where we see anything lighter is better, anything foreign is better, anything not us is better. So then we also, like Chizoba said, we see America as a land of opportunity, right? So we have this ideology and we're like, okay, great. On top of that, you have the media, right? The media is playing stuff in your head. You're seeing Black images of people in the United States, thugs, drugs, crimes. I tried to reflect and think, when did you ever see Black excellence from the United States on DSTV, just Ghana TV? When has that ever been portrayed when I was growing up? And I cannot tell you that. I cannot tell you that. And the news hasn't helped. This TV shows don't help. But everyone thinks of this place as this place that we need to come into. So it's already, that's one thing, right? Where in our own countries, we don't see ourselves. We don't get along in our own countries. The tribalism is one of the biggest things, right? You look at just Nigerians, right? It's very real. And it's a lot of African countries, you will see this tribalism. So we don't already see ourselves as one in our countries, let alone the continent, let alone cross borders and come to America. And then there's another subset of Black folks who are screaming all these things. And you're like, wait, I don't identify with you. This is not what I've come to experience. So we already coming in with a blind set. And I think the root of this, and as Louisa said, you have to talk about the Civil Rights Act, because that ties to the privilege. 1920s, it was the quota policy. So just a certain quota was allowed to come into the country, and immigrants that were allowed in were not Blacks. And we are not taught that, by the way. I think education is the pivot of all of this. Lack of poor education across the globe, but we're not taught about civil rights movements. At least I wasn't taught growing up in Ghana. So we're not taught about that, where, oh, you actually weren't allowed to be here. So your hardworking parents wouldn't even be able to enter the country had there not been people who fought, died, and screamed, shouted to be able to pass those laws, which then opened doors to, this Immigration Act, which then allowed people to come in. Oh, okay, now they have this thing, affirmative action. They have diverse candidates. They have people of color. Oh, guess what? Who's benefiting from this? When they say diverse candidates, that somehow, that always becomes gender diversity. So white women benefit from that. Yeah. But when they actually look at from a race standpoint, they go for the model Black, just because of all the points that you guys said. We don't speak up. We enter the spaces and we just nod, and we play right into the system. But the education breakdown is very key, because we're learning about slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, what happened, the tribal wars and the kings and the movement on our lands, how we were shaped into our current countries. And then they say a ship takes us away and nothing. There's an empty gap. Then you have international schools who are also looking at European history. So they're learning about World War II, the Holocaust, and all types of other things. They're paying big money to be able to learn that. You come to the States and they're like, who? Wait, what? They don't also know what happened on our end. Everyone says we never learned Black history, really. So for me, coming in college, I was met with these are some ignorant people. That was my mindset. And then I realized, they told me they think I'm ignorant as well. So there was a clash, because I used to attend the BSU, where I would sit there and all I would hear was racism. And I was like, guys, I've never experienced that. This is not my experience. That's not my experience. And they felt like I was dividing the Black population, right? So I started the African Student Association, which ruffled a lot of feathers. But in that moment, I realized they were learning Black is not a monolith. And students of Caribbean ancestry also started their own group, because we didn't have the same experiences. But I think that's where you realize I think it's intentional in the systems. We are indoctrinated by colonialism, like we were colonized. So that is all white supremacy. It looks different in our space. But I think Africans are mentally enslaved. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we're mentally enslaved. We think that we know, but we're actually mentally enslaved. And so you come here and we're taught, oh my gosh, look at this is what they're doing. And unfortunately, there's a stigma attached to African Americans. They're lazy, they're this, they're that. Don't follow them. Follow them, you will not succeed. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
Then it gets to a point where we are the desired outcome, right? They have the candidates and they say, we're going with this one. She's international and she has that diverse background. It looks great on our website as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to pick that candidate. And you don't realize that we're all playing into the system, pushing Black Americans down. It's a weird and sick cycle. And that's why it's very important, because at the end of the day, it scares me at times, actually, because sometimes I read statistics where I see, and again, not picking on anyone's base, but where it's like Nigerians are the most educated group and they're the biggest number of doctors and engineers and da-da-da. The problem with that is that means these are the folks who have a seat at very important tables.
Thank you.
Very, very important tables. And their voice is now being used as the Black voice. So
And
when you have someone in that space who says, I don't see race, all lives matter, or anything of that sort, it is so detrimental. So it is, I can go, this is a space that really bugs me, because with the privilege, to whom much is given, much is expected. With the privilege, Africans have so much that we need to step up and do. And I think I've seen it so far too often where people don't step up to that. And it's not right.
No, you made so many great, incredible points. And I just want to touch on one because, I'm Nigerian, so I could call my people out. The number is 59% of Nigerians are educated in this country. And then when you really take a look at it, we are super
everywhere
in healthcare, like in the healthcare positions, in the specialty positions, we are the ones there. And we are quiet too many times. Like, we just sit there and we take it, and we also sit there and we allow, some of us have warped our brains enough to get closer to whiteness, to the point where we allow white people to talk crap about Black people, even Africans, but then they say, oh, you're different. Like, what in the world? No, that is ridiculous. Like, we are some of the ones that have a seat at the table. And so we need to start calling that out. And secondly, to what you said about, us learning certain histories over there and them learning pretty much just white history over here, there is a complete erasure of history that some people who did middle school, high school, and college like me, some of us, we come here, we don't even get that. And I'm sitting with the Black kids. Like, I went to low income middle school, low income high schools, and we didn't get any history about, I didn't know anything about the Tulsa riots. I didn't know anything about the Rosewood massacres. I didn't know anything about Seneca Falls, that is now Central Park right now. I didn't know anything about all of the atrocities that white people have committed in this country. I had no idea until I was in college and I decided to take those classes. You even have to seek out those classes. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that all of what you've been talking about speaks to sort of my experience as well. Not in the sense of that I immigrated here and that I had my formative years in a all Black, all African environment, but that my experiences growing up and having to educate my parents about certain things and giving them the context. It's been interesting this past couple of months to see the sort of awakening take place with my parents. There had been things that I'd been saying, but that the broad context and the vocabulary with which to define their experiences hadn't quite taken. But about that whole phenomenon of being in those spaces, of having the seat at the table, of being the filler for, the Black box to check off. I think there has to be recognition of also people who are just ignorant of that level of struggle. People who would say that the first time they realized they were Black is when they came to the United States. Before you had you had your classification, you had your group, you had your nationality. It wasn't you are classified as Black. So that time of adjustment, and then realizing that all of the things that you encounter have not had to be colored by that awareness of your classification. You know, in a different context, you classify differently and you interact with things differently based on how you've been taught to classify and how people around you classify. And so that time of adjustment, I think, of course, as what we're saying here, it starts with recognizing the privilege and recognizing these impacts and recognizing all of these things that have a play that at first are easy to dismiss. It's easy to dismiss someone as lazy when you don't see that all of the structural things that have kept this person down, that have beaten this person down so that they've seen what happens when they try and that they lose anyway, so why try? You know, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I realized growing up, especially with my mom, she owns 2 clinics and she, most of her staff is Black American. And she would be so confused about certain, it would seem like quirks of her staff, of why they do this, why they do that. You know, one of her favorite things to be like, oh, you know, my staff is rich. They don't like eating leftovers. They don't like, you know, it would be some of these offhand comments that seem to be harmless observations, but then realizing that even in those seemingly small instances, there's a history of that, of what it means to be getting the leftovers, the scraps, what it means to be to show that you can't afford to get another meal. You know, it's all of these things that have sort of pervaded even these most minute things. So what I realized with my mom, and of course I grew up in Mississippi, I'm in Mississippi right now, so that adds another layer to it. But I know everyone makes that face when I say I'm from Mississippi. I actually had a great childhood. Of course, retrospectively, looking at some of my experiences, I was able to pick out some, you know, some instances that things were not so kosher. But yeah, so growing up in Mississippi and also having that context as well was something that she didn't know to consider. And it wasn't that she was actively trying to be, you know, ignorant or anything like that. It's just there was no dialogue, because on one hand, Black Americans assumed that she would know these things. On the other hand, she had no idea. I remember when there was another instance where she called somebody boy. And it wasn't meant to be a derogatory thing, but someone had to pull her aside and say, there's a whole history of calling people boy and how that's disrespectful and all of that stuff. So I say that as not necessarily a pushback, but that there has to be that recognition, I think, to sort of tip people off. There's another thing to be said if people recognize it and they still perpetuate, and that's a different situation. But I think that there has to be this moment of recognizing and becoming aware that there's a different viewpoint. I'm wearing one lens and someone else has their lens on, and I can't take mine off, they can't take theirs off, but we can recognize that we both have them on, and I can recognize what impact theirs is having on them and mine is having on them. So yeah.
So I feel like we've hit on a couple of different points here, and we might have even hit on this point. You guys can continue to elaborate on it, but I do want to ask you guys, so why do you guys think, as Africans, the Black Lives Matter movement should be just as important to us?
Ooh, that's a loaded one. But I think all our conversations are going to flow into each other, because like everything is like a layer of something, you know? So the Black Lives Matter movement, it's like a huge pocket that we just have to keep dipping in. You actively have to choose to want to understand what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. You can't let the media dictate what your definition for the Black Lives movement is. That's one of the biggest things that throughout all of this, I think if anyone is trying to genuinely support, which is why from the beginning I told you guys I'm suspicious of everybody. Yes. So if you want to truly support the Black Lives Matter movement, you have to actively ask yourself what your purpose in the movement is, because you have to have a purpose to be able to channel whatever you're trying to channel, educate whoever you're trying to educate in that circle. So I had a friend, I'm going to use an example. I had a friend And she recently just moved to the United States, maybe a couple years ago now. Maybe it's been 3, I can't remember, but it's been less than 5 years probably. So the very first friend she had was an African American girl. So like before she came, you know, our aunties, they are baba of saying, you need to watch out for these people. Oh. These people are left, right, center, middle, spin all around. That's the gist that she got, you know. So and thank God for her life. She was like, I hear you, but Nigerians are worse too. So so she moved to the United States. Her very first friend was an African American girl. Now rewind a couple of years into her being, they've had a whole mix of like issues and all of that. So this whole thing started, she's been having issues with the girl. And then she was like, oh my God, I feel like, so she legit had like an outburst with the girl a couple weeks ago. And she was like, this is what they were telling me from the very beginning, blah, 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 blah. So she went off. But then she called me and she was like, I need to ask somebody that has actually had more experience in this country than I have. Because if I'm basing it off of where I am, I'm going to cross out everybody left, right, and center. But I need to base it off of somebody that has a different trajectory of experiencing like the African American culture. And I think I'm one of the only people that she actually talks to that's Nigerian since she moved here. So she called me. We went to high school in Nigeria together. So she called me and she pretty much explained all her grievances and all of that. And the first thing I had to tell her was like, it's good that you're asking for perspective. Not everybody would be willing to ask for a different perspective than theirs. Because once you make a judgment about someone, that's all you're going to dwell on. And the next person that comes around you, that's what you're going to pass on. Because that's how we Africans perpetuate the same idea of African Americans as we go. A lot of us don't do it knowingly, some of us do it subconsciously, some of us actually know what we're doing while we do. It's just like white people. Some of them know what they're doing, some of them subconsciously don't know what they're doing, some of them are very, very aware of what they're doing. Yeah. You know, that's why as the turn of the tide happened, a lot of them started donating, people started quitting their jobs and wanting to put Black people into positions. You knew that that was a problem in the very first place. So, but anyway, so I had to tell her, being for me, I've had experiences, and I'm going to use like college experiences to kind of like explain like my experience with white America and Black America. So I went to, you guys call it PWI, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went to PWI for undergraduate, and I went to HBCU for my graduate program. And like the two cultures are vastly different. Because you go to a PWI where there's amazing funding, all these white people everywhere. There are like 10 of you that are Black inside there that they manage to sprinkle like salt into the classroom. So, and then you go to a predominantly Black university and it's Black on Black on Black everywhere. But then there's a thing where there's not enough funding in the school. So you see those things and you're like, oh, wow. I used to be one of the people, I'm not gonna lie. I used to be one of the people that I would dig on Black people so bad because I just couldn't understand. You have all of this and then you're still not doing anything. What do you mean? Until I had the experience of going to HBCU and learning from all these Black people and seeing where they're truly coming from. To be able to fight a cause for something you don't understand, you have to be open about how you receive your information. Because your information cannot be coming from the crowd that is oppressing those people. Because if it's coming from those people, you're not doing anything. You're just building on your nuisance. Yeah. You have to be able to, I think like for Africans coming from wherever we're coming from, one of our biggest problems is that, who said it? Rolly said it. She's, what is it that you just said? You just made a comment about how Africans relate. Oh God, I can't remember it right now. but like, if I remember it, I'll chime it in. So like with us Africans, we have to accept that there's an actual problem. Because if you don't accept that there's an actual problem in what you're doing, there's no way that you're going to be able to accept new information or see that your view is actually polluted in any way, shape, or form, which is the problem when you have the 51% of Nigerians sitting wherever they're sitting. Half of them came from Abacha area, arena into America. So a lot of them are still living with oppressed mindsets from colonialism. So they can't even open their mouth and say shit about what is happening to African Americans. They don't even know. They don't know. So you can't expect them to be open. They themselves need to be educated. So you can't even expect them to open their mouths to have any kind of judgment on anything. They don't know. And they'll not even agree that they don't know because what? I have degree in PhD or MBBS or Y and Z. That's what they justify it as. Really though.
Imagine, let me set up a scenario. So you have a family, grew up in a specific country in the continent, sold everything, sent their kids to the family and the kids come to America, and you have to, education is the key. You have to learn, you have to get this PhD so that you can make money and will not be poor again, right? And so like that is what they force down your throats, and eventually even if you don't become a lawyer, doctor, or engineer, you will become somebody's business manager or something like that, and then you have a position, you're in a place of power, right? But you didn't learn, your educational system in your respective country did not teach you about the struggles of Blacks in America. And then you get here, and because of that poverty mindset, you don't care about anything else but making your parents proud and making money so you can go back home and build your big house. So you can make people know, you can tell people that you also made it, right? And then while you're here, while maybe you beat some of the odds and got to the place that you wanted to get to, you willfully ignore everything else that's happening in the country. Fast forward, we're here now. Black Lives Matter is here, it's in your face, but for you still have that mentality that I must make money so I can go home and take care of who, right? That's that one person. That's one subset of people who are just like, as for me and my family, I don't care about what's going on in here. I figured out how I can make my money, and that's what I'm going to have to do. You have that person. And then you have that other person who went to the college, sat in those sociology classes with me. We all learned about these systematic institutional systems that have kept Black people down. We all learned about everything. You wrote a paper about it, all of that. You got your honors, your first class, you make it to law school, you get to the top, right? And you recognize that now that you're in this position, you have two choices. You can reach back and bring other people that look like you into the space, or you could just mind your business and just enjoy the benefits. Which one sounds like is less work? If within yourself, you don't have the push to reach back and help others, you're not going to jump into a movement that calls for mobility. You're not going to jump into a movement that calls for unity and bringing people into a space,
So I think it's important, even in both of those scenarios, one might seem easier than the other, but I think it's important for us to recognize that as Africans, the one just trying to build wealth, the one that is woefully ignoring or trying to bring people in, as Africans in this country, we are seen as Black first. Like, let's not get it twisted. The police officer is not about to ask you for your name. They're not like the person that's the racist white supremacist men that might gun you down on the street while you're jogging. They don't know where you're from. They don't know you're Ghanaian. They don't know you have an MD. They don't know you have a JD. They don't know any of that. They see you, racist people see you as Black first. So that is one reason why we as Africans need to jump on the bandwagon of Black, like we need to jump, we need to support, we need to show up, we need to be there, we need to put our money where our mouths are. And just for specific examples of the institutions, especially the police, not seeing us as Africans first, model Black people first. Ahmad Diallo was shot 40 times in New York, like ridiculous amount of times. He was African. There's some other guy called Abner Luma, I think in 1997. He's a Haitian Black man. He was sodomized. There are other instances of Africans, you know, if we want to make it hit close to home before we actually care, which really shouldn't be what's going on. You should see people suffering. You should see people you should notice that America has its foot on, you know, Black people's necks, and you should be like, you know what? No, I'm gonna call you out. Like, I'm gonna tell you it's not cool. So that's why us as Africans, if you want to look at it from different perspectives, from a humanity perspective, or from the fact that they're gonna see you as Black first, that's why we also need to jump on the ship and assist.
Yeah, to sort of go off of that, that example of Amadou Diallo, and that he reaped the consequences of the system here. I think another reason why we as Africans, or first gen Africans, have more of an impetus to be involved is that, imagine we've all been here the past couple of months, and we felt that, at least I have felt that fatigue, that sort of side effect of seeing this trauma over and over again, whether it be police brutality at the protests, whether it be just increasing knowledge of how bad the problem is, or increasing awareness of all of the different issues. It's only been maybe a couple of months that this has been really, really, really in the forefront of mainstream news, and we've already started to feel that fatigue. Now imagine that you're dealing with the weight of generational trauma that you, as far back as you can remember, and before your parents can remember, have lived under this sort of thumb of oppression, that your being has been defined by others who don't see you as human. It's hard to act in that. And people have been, of course, doing that and acting within it. But there's this example that I have of here of just this difference between how we can be in that position of being more rejuvenated and being more energetic because we don't have that built into our fabric. Yes, there was colonialism. Yes, there was a lot of issues on our side, but with the specific issue of this immediate type of oppression, it's affected us differently. And I'll bring up this example of being in a country club in Jackson, Mississippi. We were not members of this country club, but we were looking for venues for my dad's 60th birthday. And my mother, both of them actually, had been to this club because the hospitals tend to host their meetings there. And so they were familiar with the place. You know, my mom was familiar with the place. And I remember going with her just to sort of scout it out, see if it could fit the number of people we were looking for. And I remember that feeling of, as soon as we crossed the threshold, feeling like we had gone back to the 50s. When I tell you that there were no Black patrons, there were no Black club members. And actually, we found out that there had been one Black guy who had been trying to get entry, and I think it might turn into a case, but he'd been actively not allowed into this. And looking at every single server was Black, in the bow tie and the vest and all of that. It felt like we stepped back in time. And as we were walking through, I felt that weight, that people would stop talking as we walked by, that there was this feeling that we were infringing on the space that was not ours and that we were not really welcome there. And it took me pointing it out to my mother, because she is uninhibited from all of this. I grew up here. I grew up with Black friends, Black American friends. I grew up and saw sort of this, and I still never fit in one category, but like I saw it growing up. So it wasn't much of anything to have to convince me, because it was part of my experience, though in a different way. But it took me pointing it out to her, where she's like, oh yeah, people have been looking at us funny and da 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 da. But like, she was like, I don't care. Like, it's like, who are they? Who are, that sort of, I could care less about their opinion of me. I'm just going to be here. And I loved that. It gave me joy. And I remember telling this to one of my friends who she's actually African, but she grew up with her mother's side, and who were Black Americans and whose ancestors picked cottons and all of that. And she said, I could never have done that. I could never, we would not be caught dead there. We couldn't have, because her grandmother told her mother, who told her that that's not a place you go, that that's not a space you enter. And so she's got this weight, she's got this generational burden placed on her. And then, you know, to go out and fight for your rights with that additionally on you. Whereas we're in this unique position where we are learning of issues or maybe experience things, but we don't have that extra burden on us. And so it will take everyone. Of course, we're suffering from, in different ways, obviously, from the effects of white supremacy, but there was something about not feeling that weight on you. And just that same friend, I went and visited her for New Year's. And I remember bonding with her family members, her grand aunts in particular. They were, you know, super sweet old ladies talking about you don't know what, but just talking. And I remember we talked to one of her grand aunts, so sweet, just one of those cozy grandmas that you just want to, you know, she'll give you food until you burst and then give you more food. But I remember on one of her displays, she had cotton. And she said, oh yeah, I picked that cotton. Wow. And my mother picked cotton, and my family, you know, my siblings picked cotton. And because we had been going through this time of intense bonding, I considered her like my family. They had adopted me as their family. And the moment she said that, I realized it hit different when it's in your family, when you can look back at those slave pictures, when you can look back and see all of that oppressive thing and have that knowledge that your family endured that. You know, it was something that goes beyond just the knowledge of it, just that goes beyond something you could read in a book. And it affected me, you know, I wasn't prepared. It sort of hit me off guard. And I said, people are walking around with this weight all the time.
Yeah.
You know, so this is all just sort of an argument that we sort of know who we are. You know, people in your name might have a whole definition, or your whole family tree could be in your name alone.
Yeah.
And we don't have to contend with this loss of identity, this family scar, in the same way that people here have to. So we sort of have to, you know, owe it to use this energy and use this position that we're in to try and speak up for those who've been oppressed for a really long time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it. I do want to like wrap up just to, you know, be cognizant of everybody's times. So I have one last question to ask, and I want every single person to answer that question for me. So, and it's a very easy question. As Africans or first generation immigrants, whatever we may be, where do you think we can start in order to, you know, be a part of what's the improvement of, where do you think we can start? And we can go in the order that we went for the introductions. I'll start. A couple of things I think we can do in order to improve aligning and recognizing is to understand our privilege. We've already delved into that. Understand our privilege, educate ourselves. Some of us don't really know the history of the people that we've come here to enjoy the fights that their forefathers fought for. So understand our privilege, educate ourselves, and check your parents. Check your parents. When they say racist things, when they check your uncles, check your aunties, check your sisters, check your brothers, check all of them. That's what I got to say.
On the same vein, in the same vein of checking people, I would say check your ignorant friends. You know, check the ones that don't see this as their fight as well. Like somebody said, and most of us have said, when we're in a situation where you could get shot or killed, nobody's thinking about your degrees. Nobody's thinking about the fact that you're African or not. You're Black. Your skin color is what people see. And if you're not going to stand for a movement that is going to, in the long run, once again, benefit your skin color, then maybe you don't even need to be here in the first place, you know? And so I think that people need to start calling out other people, and we all need to grow. Like Chizoba said, at some point in time, there was a mindset that the African struggle was different from the Black American struggle, but that needs to go away. And once you step foot into this country, you need to be as passionate about fighting for equal rights for Black people, LGBTQ communities, everybody, women, everybody, hands down. You need to be as passionate as that as anything else, because you are a minority, African or not, degree or not, whatever. You need to be as passionate and join the movement.
Woo. Check the Trump supporters at the African. Let's start there. That's a whole different segment, because those people, they're mental in the brain. But anyway, I feel like for us to move forward, you have to be able to pull someone behind you. If you get to a level in your life, there's definitely somebody else behind you that's looking for a little bone to help them through something. You have to be willing to pull somebody else behind. It has to be like a cord that just keeps adding on at the end, adding on at the end. For Black people, for us to be able to infiltrate the rooms that we need to infiltrate in this country in the long run, we have to be aware that we need to pull people behind us. That 50 whatever percent of people that are successful in this country that are Nigerian, I bet you none of them want to help the other person because, oh, you want that person to be bigger than me? No, they cannot be bigger than me. No, we're not helping them. Hence, everybody is in the same puddle. Mm-hmm. Struggling the same way. When your brother is up there, instead of him to help you, my ideology in life, and I think is developed more since I've been here, is if I grow, everybody else around me grows. Yeah. That's how it is. That's the ideology we all need to be having as individuals in the United States of America. Not, oh, I'm Nigerian, so it's only Nigerians that will grow. Oh, I'm Ghanaian, it's only Ghanaians that will grow. Oh, I'm Tanzanian, it's only Tanzanians that will grow. African Americans, who are those? They can grow by themselves too.
Actually. Let me try and keep this short. Starter, racism does not discriminate. They don't care where you're from, what you're bringing to the table. You're black, blackity, black, period. Dr. Yaba Blay defines race as a political identity, and she says we need to believe we're one. And she views it as, I don't want to butcher it. She says, it's a political identity that connects people from the African diaspora all over the world. So first of all, that should be your mindset. We're all connected in some way or form. Even if you don't understand it immediately, that should be kind of the mindset that Black as a race is kind of our identity. But on that note, where do you start from? I think it is incumbent upon all Africans to start to unpack your own personal trauma. And I mean, our anti-Blackness. There's a lot of anti-Blackness in Africa. And it shows itself in many ways, many ways, colorism being only just one of them, or foreign being better. And you can ask the people who are currently on the continent, when business opportunities present itself, why is it that the Lebanese person is getting all the business opportunities versus the locals who have also invested and lived their lives there? That is a whole nother conversation, but we need to unpack our trauma and our own anti-Blackness, because that is step one. Then I think at this day and age, in the realm of social media and just access, I don't cut anyone slack. I'm sorry. You need to educate yourself. No one is going to educate you. I went to a PWI. I took a Black History Month a Black History class. I chose to take it. They didn't teach me nothing. I learned about Stephen Biko in South Africa. I wasn't learning African American history. It was all types of other great Black history, but there was so much I didn't get from it. And so you cannot depend on the institutions already in place, which are not going to teach that. You need to self-educate. I think when you displace yourself and put yourself in this space, and you occupy a space in this country, whether you want to believe it or not, you need to think of yourself as a visitor or someone who is in this is your space, it's home, but you need to think of yourself as a visitor. And it is your duty to educate yourself on the history and what has truly happened, because it's no one's duty to do that for you. Once you educate yourself, you need to understand your role in this journey. And I say that to say, when I said you're a visitor, this is going to sound crazy. This whole time we keep seeing people say allies. This is what you need to do. Allies, this is what you need to do. To some extent, I kind of looked at, it's going to sound crazy, Africans as allies. Mm-hmm. If you are not educated enough, if you're not educated enough about the movement, you need to consider yourself an ally. And what does that mean? You need to know when you need to step back, be silent, and listen. The first step, I think, when Africans come here, we tend to stick in our little communities, in our groups, and we click with our own Africans, and we don't intermingle with people who've lived here and to understand their experiences. Some of us, Louisa, I know I can speak for you, like I joined a Black sorority. That exposed me to backgrounds and experiences that I probably wouldn't have gotten. Whatever that outlet is for you, you need to actually get to know the people as human beings, as your brothers and sisters. Yeah. So understand education, understand your role in the movement. If you don't understand the movement, that is okay. It's not okay for everybody, it's okay. You need to present yourself as an ally, vocalize that you don't understand it. You need to be able to acknowledge you don't understand it and ask for help if you need it, and educate yourself, but also make sure you're not speaking or taking the spot of someone who is knowledgeable about it and becoming the Black voice because you're going to be moving the movement backwards. Also, just in general, Black Lives Matter movement, Black Lives Matter, like your life, it's your life. Again, we're Black, Black, Black. There's nothing to understand. There's no hidden mirrors. It's Black Lives Matter. And you are not above that. I'm sorry, I have to say this. Africans tend to become Black elites in this country, and this idea of,
amen,
and we're better than this person, and I am at the top, this prejudice, it is not cute, it is not okay, it is toxic. Black elite, you are not exempt, you're not exempt. They don't care, again, what school, what degree, whatever you have. Humble yourselves. Humble yourselves. You can get it and you can be gone in 2 seconds. So again, you need to be aware of that. Black elitism, do not fall into that trap. I think that is part of white supremacy when they pick the few chosen ones. And then when you do have a seat at the table, I'll wrap up, when you do have a seat at the table, please be sure to educate yourself and make sure, if you don't know, and I have done this when I started, I realized I was at seats on diversity councils and I was like, whoa, what are we looking for? People are like, oh, defund the police. And I'm like, okay, what does that actually mean? I was like, but who's gonna protect us? Like, you don't understand. It's okay, ask. But when you have a seat at the table and you pick up that mic, make sure you are advancing the movement and not setting us backwards. It is.
Owens. We have.
Sorry, I talked too much.
Thank you.
But yeah, that is yes. That is that. I'll end it there.
All right, so y'all kind of took most of the words out of my mouth already, but it's okay. We move. I really, really enjoyed when you were talking about, the whole culture and the teaching versus experience situation, because that's something I feel like, it's really important, because if I'm getting taught at school that this was what slavery is about, and then I go home and then my grandmother or my great-grandmother or my great-grand-grandmother who was a slave tells me this is what it really is about, I'm more than likely to rely on what my great-great-grandmother told me, that what is taught at school, right? So a lot of times I think that as individuals, we need to educate ourselves, not only what is being taught at school, but what is being on, what is being shown on media, but do your own research, educate yourself, because if you don't know, then you don't speak up. Or there are people who don't know and speak wrong facts because they don't know, and they're just out there spreading wrong information, and like Effie said, they're just taking us back instead of moving us forward. So educate yourself. It's not that hard to do that. Do your own research before you come up and speak about anything. Do your own research. And also, I will say I'm a strong believer of checking your own personal biases, because a lot of times we always have personal bias. I remember putting a poll and asking people, do you have personal bias? And some people said no. I'm like, that's very unrealistic. Everybody has a personal bias. You have to, you have to really sit down and understand and catch yourself to understand what your personal bias is. Because then if you don't know what your personal bias is, then you just going along with the flow like everybody else. Yeah. So check yourself, check your own personal biases. And then I would say one thing I really want to talk about is using your own platform, which is what we're doing right here, which is really great. Using your own platform to create awareness, because some people don't know, or the experiences are different for some people. Like I've learned a lot just talking to you guys and just writing down stuff. Some of these things I did not know. So I'm writing it down to go do my own research too. So use your own platform to create an awareness where people can come together, share their experiences, because I don't care how much degree you have or how educated you think you are, you know, there's always somebody that's there to teach you something. You can always learn a thing or two from another person. I think my last thing will be, amongst all of this, embracing the culture, embracing the multiculturalism, even if we say, okay, we're here, but this is not our country, but at the same time, we're here. So we need to embrace it, because I can't tell you how many times, I know this is what we're talking about, but I can't tell you how many times when I have been to Nigeria and I see how Africans Nigerians specifically, because I'm in Nigeria, Nigerians specifically, when they have people like from America visit, especially a white man or a white woman, they just cling onto that person without showing them, like, this is our country. This is us. This is where we belong. Let's embrace you to our culture. But no, it's the other way around. It's like that person, you can be a regular person and go over there and you all of a sudden become a king of something out of nowhere, you know? So I feel like for us, we need to start embracing their culture too as well, learning about their culture and embracing it too as well. Let's not be biased. Let's try to be, you know, a little bit more open about that too. So that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. These points, I've loved it. I've loved this time. And there's not that much to expand on, but I will try. I think just sort of echoing what I've been hearing, that adopting the Black race, and again, social construct, but it has real ramifications, obviously, throughout history, like adopting that and taking that, meaning that that doesn't erase your heritage. You adopting the moniker of Black does not erase that you are Nigerian or that you're Ghanaian or all of your other experiences, but it's a political, I really liked that definition, that political aspect of it. So just amplifying that again. And I think the last thing I would say is that we as human beings do things that make sense. So if you're observing other groups, if you're observing other people and you don't understand why they're behaving the way they are, why they're reacting the way they are, then you don't have all of the information. Because we as individuals will do things that make sense to us. It may not be the right line of reasoning, but we all react towards the influences, towards the different forces in our life and respond to that. So if you see someone and you see them and you think they're being lazy or something like that, there's something you still haven't seen. It's not, you know, to take away the onus of responsibility on other people, but it's just more of a call to push and try and understand more, as opposed to dismiss or use your own lens to define someone else's existence. I think that's just a good posture shift that needs to happen before you can push forward to understand, because you can't try to understand something with your definition and with a refusal to acknowledge that there are other realities out there, that there are other experiences that people have had, that there are other things that inform other people's behaviors. So I think that sort of gets a little bit at this division that, you know, we see because of course our experiences and all of our memories and all of these things form who we are, and it's hard to, we don't have access to the world with a capital W. We don't have access to the truth with a capital T, but we can pursue it. And we can acknowledge that we have limitations, but we will pursue it. And along that same vein, we've seen that once people maybe publish things on a mainstream media network or in a book, it seems to be taken as objective. I think we also need to recognize that nothing that is published and written by another human being is objective. It is all subjective, even science. This is one of my least favorite things to hear, that people say science is objective. Science is one of the most subjective things, from the populations that people survey, from who they test, to, you know, the populations and where they come from. All of that is subjective. Once there's a human being involved, it's subjective. And so that's more of the push to investigate. I remember when I was in Ferguson and just the media swarming around on the night of when they announced the non-indictment of Darren Wilson, who was the police officer who shot Michael Brown. And what the media would show, and I had people calling me from Ghana, see if I was okay, if it seemed like the world was on fire. But what the media didn't show is, one, all of the peaceful protests. And it's crazy how the narrative has changed now, because now it's, people are accepting that, oh, there are agitators that come in, there are other things that came in. But at that time, all they saw were Black people rioting. And what it didn't capture of that night is all of the planning that went in the previous days, of how they'd been teasing that the decision was going to be announced, and they were stringing people along, amplifying the tension, and then that they chose to announce it at night, and that they chose to not tell the family beforehand, so we could see the pain of the mother who was finding this out at the same time as the protesters. And what they didn't announce, or what they didn't show, is that at all of the other protests, there had been a line of police officers, that there had been protest leaders that would always keep things sort of centered, but that they'd arrested those people that night, that they had taken away that police line, and that they had lined the streets with empty police vehicles on purpose. Like, that's what you didn't see in that narrative. And so I think that whole taking the onus on you to say, just because I read it in a book doesn't mean that that's the objective fact, that that's the objective tale, that is the story. Because we know, as Africans ourselves, and how our stories have been written and co-opted and all of that, that we know that just because someone else is telling it doesn't mean that they've become the experts. So I think I would leave it with that. Just be your own expert. We all are intelligent human beings. We can question these things, and then we can pursue them. But it all comes from this desire within, and realizing that if you're going to be here, you got to be present, and you got to be here. You're not in two places at once. You are here.
Wow, thank you all so. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, do not kill me, because you made a point, Lamle, that you said subjective, and I have heard this actually, and it was alarming, where Africans come and they're questioning the wrong things, in my opinion. They're questioning whether white supremacy actually exists or whether racism is real. So I'm just gonna put it out there on behalf of all of us. That is your baseline. White supremacy doesn't exist. This country is racist. Systemic oppression is present. It's not one bad actor, it is systemic. So that's your baseline when you're starting your research and your education. That's not what you're supposed to be questioning. Do your other investigations elsewhere, because I think we spend too much time trying to say, but one person doesn't mean it's systemic. It is white supremacy, and this country is racist. And that's where you need to start off and do your research. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you all so much. This was an incredible conversation. Probably my favorite. I love it. Thank you for taking the time out. Viewers, please like, comment, subscribe. We want to hear your thoughts on this. And once again, I want to thank all of these beautiful, intelligent ladies that have come and added such great input to the conversation. Thank you guys.
Real talk, deep talk.